Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett, and thank you for joining me for a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. Guess what? It's time for another UFOs over your hometown episode. I've done a bunch of these already. As you may know, I put out a challenge some time ago. Name any town, any city, any location on this planet, and I bet you I can find a UFO encounter there. I've gotten over 800 responses, covered about 100 of them so far. And yeah, I'm finding UFOs in all of the locations you guys have provided. So thanks for being a part of this. I'm learning so much doing the research for these cases. This takes a lot of time and research to do, so I've been putting them out pretty slowly. But yeah, this is now episode 9. The title of this episode is UFOs in Your Hometown, episode 9. Pretty excited. I've got 9 new locations coming from all over the planet, cases reaching back well over 100 years up to the present day, and covering not only sightings, but landings, face-to-face encounters with humanoids, some UFO crash retrievals actually, all kinds of evidence as well. Electromagnetic effects, physiological effects, animal reactions, landing traces, some really wonderful photographic cases as well. So yeah, a lot of multiple witness cases too. Really interesting cases. Lots of humanoids in this one, because I know you guys love hearing about humanoids encounters. They're my favorite as well. A few onboard cases as well. So yeah, I think you'll find this pretty interesting. And the 9 locations I am covering today, provided by you guys, include Katwijk, Holland, Nanjing, China, the whole country of Pakistan, Quapaw, Oklahoma. You tried to stump me on that one, but I found some cases. Salinas, California. Boy, Salinas really delivered. Dubuque, Iowa. Daytona Beach, Florida. Statesville, North Carolina, and finally, Annadale, New York. So yeah, a lot of locations. This is going to be a pretty long episode, but I hope you'll find it really interesting because, man, oh man, some of the cases in this one are just off the charts. Amazing. Let's get started. The first location I'm covering today is Katwijk, Holland. This comes from Annadale. Thank you, Annadale, for suggesting this location. Didn't find a whole lot. This is a pretty small area, about 12 square miles. But I found 2 really interesting cases, and one, in fact, does involve some great photographs. So I think you'll find it interesting. I certainly hope so. The first case that I could find in Katwijk, Holland, occurred on the night of July 8, 2003. The witness is a 63-year-old retired officer from a Dutch sea resort who had an excellent and very close view of a classic flying saucer. As she says in her own words, "It was 3:30 a.m. when I saw this strange saucer-shaped object, round and flat, that looked like a sort of white button with 4 dark holes in the middle. Somewhere outside of it, there were small square lights that didn't emit real light, but a kind of hazy shine. The object was about 10 meters in diameter, 30 feet, and hovering 6 to 7 meters above my garage, about 20 feet. The object itself was twirling very fast, like a bicycle wheel. It was striking that the object made the same half circle over and over again, northwards and then back to my house. I watched it for quite some time, but I didn't dare go outside. I opened the window and found it quite remarkable that I could hear no sound from such a big object. About 4:15 a.m., it got lighter outside, and I could merely see the curves of the object. It became blurry, but still visible. It didn't fly away, but as it became lighter, the contours of the object faded until I couldn't see it anymore." So this sighting clearly impressed the witness deeply. She also reports something interesting. The day after this encounter, she suffered from a terrible headache, which she links to this close-up sighting. The only other case I could find in Katwijk occurred on September 2nd, 2023, and this was actually posted on Reddit. This involves 2 photographs and a very short video clip. As the person who posted this writes, "My friend spotted this UFO today. He said it flew at around 300 meters and at a given moment even dropped in height. He said it couldn't have been a balloon because of its movements. He said it looked big. It was very strange to him. So you can see the photos here. And here also is a very, very short 2-second video clip of a silver gray roundish object floating just above the rooftops. You have to be quick to see it. It's right above the roof, heading downwards and disappearing. There you go. I'll admit that 2 cases is not a lot, Annadale, but you didn't stump me. I found some activity there. I keep saying it, UFOs are seen everywhere on this planet. That's the whole point of this series of UFOs over your hometown. No matter where you check, there is a history of UFO encounters, and that's absolutely true of Nanjing, China. This was a difficult location to research here in the United States. I don't have a whole lot of access to reports in China, but I absolutely found some amazing ones, including ones that go way, way back to 1892, some current ones, some really interesting photographic cases. So Nanjing, China was suggested by Alfredo. Alfredo, this is for you. I found some really cool cases. Nanjing is a big city. So yeah, this one is really interesting. Nanjing is a pretty big city, 2,500 miles wide. It's the capital of the Jiangsu province in China, and it definitely has a few very interesting cases, including one way back in the 1800s, September 28, 1892. It's one of the most spectacular sightings here. It's also one of China's earliest recorded UFO sightings, and it was memorialized in a painting called Soaring Scarlet Flame in the Sky by Wu Yoru, and it shows dozens of people on the Dubuque Bridge staring in wonder up at a massive glowing object. You can see the painting here. There's an inscription on it, and I'll just read the inscription. As the inscription says, at 2000 on 28 September, a fireball appeared suddenly in the northern sky of Nanjing. Its shape resembled a gigantic egg, and it traveled slowly from east to west. Clearly visible in the night sky, its color was red, but it had no luster. Hundreds of civilians stood on the Dubuque Bridge, jostling for a good view, standing on tiptoe, craning their necks upward, while the fireball appeared to float slowly in the air. It lingered for the duration of a meal, fading little by little into the distance. Some said it was a meteor, but that would disappear in an instant. This ball's movement, from its first appearance in the near sky to its final disappearance in the distance, was quite sluggish. It cannot have been a meteor. Others said that it was a lantern kite that children flew, but the wind was blowing to the north that night while the object was heading east, so it cannot have been a lantern kite either. For a while, everyone nattered, but no one could solve the mystery. None of the theories made sense. An elderly man said, when it first arose, there was a slight noise which was hardly audible, like the buzzing approach of men darting across the south gate. The sound was so soft that most people would have missed it. And he added that the object soared up into the sky from the southern outskirts of the city. It was so strange. So very interesting. It's got a lot of elements of modern-day sightings. And there are quite a few modern-day sightings, of course, as well. Here's one from January 14, 1999. It's a brief but nevertheless interesting account involving a very long, rod-shaped UFO that reportedly remained in view for 4 hours. This would be the longest recorded sighting over Nanjing. It was described by witnesses as a shiny red object, 10 kilometers high, very long, moving slowly across the sky over the city and gradually fading away. 3 years later, November 8, 2002, another remarkable encounter was witnessed by the pilots of no less than 3 separate airlines. The first was by a Xiamen Airlines pilot who described a light blue object which hovered past his plane at about 80 kilometers north of Nanjing. But at the same time, the pilots of a Shandong airline plane about 120 kilometers away saw what was apparently the same object, which they described as white-blue and having the shape of a skateboard. And finally, a third pilot called the airport control tower in Tonglu, Zhejiang, about 300 kilometers away, to report apparently this same object. The next encounter occurred on August 17, 2006, and on this day, a UFO was allegedly sighted and videotaped over Nanjing, but there are, of course, some doubts about the authenticity of this video, which could very well be CGI, but I present it here for what it's worth. At any rate, it was about 3 weeks later, on September 7, 2006, that there was reportedly a sighting of a V-shaped object over Nanjing. Again, I was not able to find any first-hand eyewitness testimony to confirm this. But here is a really interesting case which occurred on July 22, 2009. It's an excellent and well-verified photographic case which occurred during the solar eclipse on that day. As the eclipse passed over Nanjing, China, scientists at the Purple Mountain Observatory, which you can see here, observed and filmed a UFO for a total of 40 minutes. You can see the photograph here of this strange object. The director of the observatory, Ji Haisheng, refused to speculate publicly on the nature or origin of this object and stopped short of saying it was a UFO, only that it was unidentified, which I guess is what a UFO is. As can be seen, UFOs are certainly not unknown in China and are apparently quite popular, because in 2015 an exhibit opened up to the public in Nanjing showing a life-size model of a UFO, which you can actually go inside and experience what it might be like to have a ride inside a flying saucer. So if you ever get to go to Nanjing, that might be pretty interesting to experience. How cool is that? China does take this subject very seriously, and you can tell that there's a lot of interest in UFOs and extraterrestrials. It's one of the things I like about this subject, is it's bringing the whole world together. I think pretty much everyone on this planet now knows what the term UFO means, and it's really going mainstream, this subject. It's now being taken much more seriously than it has in the past. Now we move to a new location. I was very excited to explore this. Thank you, Khan Asif. Today I will be exploring the country of Pakistan. You were really wondering if there were UFO encounters there, and I was almost certain I could find some, and sure enough I did. And some really good ones too. I think you'll be really impressed at some of these cases. So thank you, Khan. Let's move forward with UFOs over Pakistan. Pakistan is actually the 5th most populous country in South Asia, with 240 million people. It contains more than 340,000 square miles and has a very long history going back well over 8,000 years. Now, a country of this size should have thousands upon thousands of cases, but it's hard for someone like me here in the US to find cases there. But I did find some, and here are a half dozen pretty solid UFO cases. The earliest I could find occurred on December 11, 1952. This case came from the Reuters News Service, which writes as follows. 4 flying saucers were reported sailing in formation high over Karachi today. Witnesses said they saw 4 translucent white discs trailing smoke. They said they suddenly shot up vertically and disappeared. It was 1 year later, almost exactly, December 21st, 1953, when another really interesting case surfaced. This was actually mentioned in a CIA report, and as the report reads, 2 brilliant objects flying at an altitude of more than 4,700 meters were seen over Peshawar on the night of 21 December. The objects, coming from the southeast and thought to be flying saucers, disappeared in the direction of Afghanistan. This very interesting and unusual case comes from Graham W. Birdsall, a British researcher. It was published in UFO magazine in the May-June 1999 issue. And yes, this is a very unusual case. This occurred on the afternoon of March 20, 1955, in the city of Karachi, Pakistan. There are actually thousands of witnesses to this case, but the main one is John Parker, a British Air Force officer. He was flying over the city, into the city, with a number of other officers, and they all saw this very large, kind of bronze-colored craft hovering over the city at very low level. So they landed, went to the city, and sure enough, this object was still there and was hovering quite low, some 300 feet above the ground. So as they got towards this thing, they realized that there were thousands of people on the ground looking up at this thing. It was really crowded. People were sitting on the ground praying. Others were looking up in wonder at this craft. So they joined the crowd, walked about 60 yards away from beneath this disc, which they estimate was about 150 feet across, 2 or 3 stories high, and now it was hovering only 125 feet off the ground. This was not your average flying saucer by any means, because they could see what looked like rivets, catwalks and ladders, portholes, aerials. They saw what looked like a large black hole underneath it. There was a whooshing sound. There was sort of laser-like effects coming off of this craft. The craft was swinging back and forth a little bit. So it looked to John Parker like it was experiencing engine problems of some kind. So as he's looking at this, he can see that there are portholes. And through the portholes, he sees what looks like the shapes of people. There was a translucent dome on top. It was lit up with a pinkish red light. There were also red, green, and blue flashing lights inside the dome. And they watched this for some time. And finally, just left the area to get a drink. They did not see this object depart. It was still there when they left. But an amazing case, which honestly sounds to me like it's probably a human reverse-engineered craft, but you can certainly make up your own minds about it. Quite a few cases, actually. Here's one from November 9, 1955, 2 years later, also from the Reuters News Service. This involves UFOs over a Pakistani airport, coming originally from the Karachi Morning News. The report reads, "Bluish, diminutive saucers about 6 inches in diameter were sighted one night recently over the Tajgan Airport in East Pakistan. Engineers of the Pakistan International Airlines and airport meteorologists said the tiny saucers were traveling at roughly 1,000 miles an hour at a height of about 1,500 feet. Now, per the newspaper, quote, the saucers were seen for a total of 17 minutes and lit up the whole airport." Now, obviously, these discs are larger than 6 inches in diameter. That would be the apparent size, or they wouldn't be able to be seen at 1,500 feet altitude. 1 year later, July 4, 1956, as reported by the News Dispatch from Peshawar, witnesses described their sighting of a deep red circular object trailing brilliant sparks in its wake as it moved across the midnight sky. It was visible for a full 2 minutes, at which point it dropped down behind the Khyber Hills. Here's a very interesting report, which occurred on June 17, 1969, also from Peshawar. This actually comes from a U.S. Army intelligence operation in the Army's USA SOU-23, assigned to a USAF radio research site on a classified mission in the area. The witness says that it was 11:30 p.m. as he sat with a coworker on the patio outside his barracks. And as he says, and I quote, "We noticed out over the desert 3 white discs. Other USAF personnel were also watching them. Some had cameras. There was no sound, no disturbances from the objects, complete silence. After several minutes, the objects shot straight up and out of sight. Again, no sound. The USAF commander over the next few days asked that no one mention this." It actually took the witness more than 50 years to break his silence, and he eventually reported this encounter to Newfork, the National UFO Reporting Center. Here's another one from Newfork, which occurred in July of 1986 over Rawalpindi. It was around 11:30 a.m., a daylight sighting, one morning in early July 1986, that the witness was playing cricket with some friends when they all saw 8 objects hovering one above the other. They thought at first that the objects might be kites, but they didn't look like kites. They were metallic gray in color and were hovering in place. They continued playing, but keeping an eye on these strange objects, when suddenly they began to move slowly upwards, and then, very quickly, darted straight up into space. The witness would have reported it, but as he says, there are no UFO reporting centers in Pakistan. And it wasn't until he came to live in the United States and saw all these UFO programs on TV that he decided to report it. Here's another case from New Fork. It occurred November 5, 2002. New Fork has a few dozen reports, mostly of anomalous lights, but this case rises above the rest and comes from a Pakistani Air Force pilot who reported his case only 4 days after it occurred. He was one pilot of 3 Cobra gunship helicopters that were performing maneuvers at night in the Multan area. As he says, it was a pitch-dark night when something resembling an illuminated round of artillery shells appeared. It was faster than a helicopter, but slower than an airplane. Its movements were very well coordinated. The strange thing was that it didn't have any engines, and its aerodynamic shape was not like an aircraft, but it was flying like an aircraft. It was far superior than us, and was capable of making abrupt changes in altitude and direction. It was elongated in shape, 15 feet in length, and it had a dim amber light towards the bottom. So seeing this, the witness radioed the air traffic controller for permission to follow this unknown craft. Permission was granted, and the witness tried to follow it in his Cobra helicopter, but as he says, and I quote, "It dodged me in speed and maneuvers, and then it turned towards us and passed from a distance of 50 feet. Wow, that's close. Now some thought it might be a drone, but as the witness says, we 6 pilots who were airborne at the time know in our hearts that it was nothing close to an aircraft in shape. I don't know what it is. I have heard a lot about UFOs, but I saw it for the first time in my life." So interesting. I know that wasn't a whole lot of reports. I can almost guarantee you that that is just the tip of the iceberg. The vast majority of people don't report their sightings. And in a country like Pakistan, which as far as I know doesn't have an official UFO reporting service, well, the vast majority are definitely going to go unrecorded, unreported, undocumented, uninvestigated, really in any way. So most of what we know about UFOs, it's really, again, just the surface. Almost all the information about this is sliding right under the radar. We just don't hear about it. But it's definitely changing for the better, and people are, again, taking the subject much more seriously. So now let's move to our next location, which is the tiny little town of Quapaw, Oklahoma. Thank you, Ton Pro, for suggesting this location. I was pretty worried. This is a very small town, about 800 people, so I wasn't sure if I was going to find anything, but it turns out it's a pretty interesting place. It has a history of what we call spook lights or earth lights, which aren't technically UFOs in terms of being extraterrestrial craft, but definitely related. And I think I found some good cases of actual UFOs as well. So yeah, Quapaw, Oklahoma, here we come. Quapaw is, as I said, a tiny little rural town, a population of about 800 people, not far from Joplin, Missouri. It serves as the capital of the Quapaw Native American Nation, and as it turns out, it's one of several locations in the United States known for what we call spook lights or earth lights. Other locations are the Marfa Lights in Marfa, Texas, or the Brown Mountain Lights in Brown Mountain, North Carolina. And there are quite a few reports of these earth lights, which some people categorize as UFOs, but are certainly not ET craft as we would think of them. However, there are a few impressive cases which could be categorized as a UFO in Quapaw. One occurred on September 19, 1972. It was around 5:30 to 6 a.m. George McWaters looked outside the kitchen window of his farmhouse and noticed a brilliant light over the Devil's Promenade area. And as George says, it seemed to be coming up over the river, and it was a bright blue-white. At first I thought it might be some sort of reflection off the river, and I went to another room to drink a cup of coffee. When I came back to the kitchen, though, I saw it had moved to the east and was getting brighter. So as he watched it grow brighter and move towards the east, he woke up his wife to take a look. And as he says, it was the oddest color, sort of a bluish green and white, and too bright to look at directly for very long. As his wife says, it was bigger than any star I've ever seen. So they watched it for about an hour when two more lights appeared. They were the same strange color but dimmer and to the south, and as Mrs. McWaters says, we could see all three together. Then the two smaller ones vanished. So they continued watching the big one when, as George says, it seemed to be hanging there about 6 to 10 miles away, and it got very bright before it disappeared. Phone calls to the Joplin airport revealed that no weather balloon or aircraft were known to be in that area at that time. Now, here is a less ambiguous report which occurred on April 9, 2006 and seems to involve a solid craft. It was reported by the witness to New Fork, who said that he was heading south through Quapaw when he saw this UFO. As he says, I saw one silver cigar-shaped object hovering in the sky. I thought to myself, what the heck is that? And before I was able to finish the thought, it took off from the east to the west faster than anything could possibly go. There was no vapor trail or anything left to indicate what propulsion it used. Definitely sounds like a classic UFO. Here's another one that's pretty interesting. November 6, 2014. As the witness says, while driving home tonight, we saw a super bright white light with blinking blue and reddish lights moving in different directions above the tree line. We thought it could be a helicopter, but got closer, and it was circular and made a humming sound. So clearly not a spook light. But I will say reports of the Quapaw spook light go back more than 100 years, usually involving a glowing ball of light seen bouncing around in different areas. And many people have taken photographs of these, as you can see here. People come here from all over the world to the best alleged viewing spot along East 50 Road near the Missouri state line to view this light. One witness is Raymond Barnett, who lives in the area and said he and his friends saw it and that the light came right up to his car. As he says, it scared the devil out of me. It got right on the car hood, and it looked like daylight out there. It just looked like a ball of fire that came out of nowhere, then all at once disappeared. Another witness is Tom Jackson of Joplin, Missouri, who, in 1993, thinking that the reports of the spook light were bogus, went to visit the area on Halloween night and got a very close-up view. As he says, I remember it started out at the end of the road, got about 10 yards from the car, and then shot back. It looked like it was going to shoot into my truck. I think that's the scariest thing I've ever seen. I screamed so loud, I probably woke up every person in 20 miles. You couldn't pay me enough to go out there again. I don't know what that is or what causes it, but there's no way. That's out of this world. So again, it's been photographed on many occasions, and theories range from ghosts of soldiers to the wandering spirits of two young Quapaw lovers who, forbidden to marry, took their own lives, to reflecting headlights from distant cars, flashlights, campfires, all kinds of theories, and it doesn't appear to be any of those. It certainly can't be headlights, as the reports go well back before the invention of the automobile. Now, the area is known to be rich in minerals, silica, calcium, magnesium, other minerals, which more than likely is the cause of the phenomena of earth lights in this area and in many other areas across the United States and the world. Very, very interesting. And I think I might do an episode on just spook lights because, again, they're seen all over the world, not just in the United States. Hesdalen, Norway, for example, is another really good example of an area where these strange lights are being seen. But yeah, it appears that UFOs have been seen over Quapaw, Oklahoma as well. So thank you very much, Ton Crow. I truly appreciate the suggestion, and I hope you found that segment interesting. Now we move to another location, Salinas, California. I've been there. It's a beautiful place. It's not a huge city, but boy oh boy did I find some amazing cases. A lot of them, actually. This location was suggested by 3 of you people out there, so that includes Jovan Lopez, Raul Duke, and Jaime. So 3 of you out there. Thanks, guys, for suggesting this location. I learned a lot on this one. This one was really interesting. And I have to tell you, a couple of cases in this city are unlike anything I have heard before and are super fascinating and so unusual. And yeah, an apparent crash retrieval as well, which I found super fascinating. So yeah, this was probably my favorite location in terms of UFO history in this particular episode. So I think you'll find it pretty interesting as well. Thank you, Jovan. Thank you, Raul. Thank you, Jaime. Let's explore the history of UFOs over Salinas. This amazing report from June 1945 definitely shows that our military knows more about UFOs than they're saying. It comes from a man whose father had a very interesting confession regarding an experience he had while working at Salinas Army Air Base. Says the witness, and I quote, "My father, Lilbert L. Doss, was mustered out of the Air Force and trains to home were scarce. In his free 2 weeks before leaving California, he chose to visit Salinas Air Force Base. After visiting friends there, he accidentally wandered into a restricted area. In a large hangar labeled Top Secret, he observed and examined 3 flying discs. All had USAF markings and tripod landing gear. No obvious method of propulsion could be found. He was arrested, interrogated, and forced to sign a secrecy agreement. Some of this was done at pistol point. He deeply resented being treated that way by his government, and he told me of this incident before he died in 1990. He said, 'There aren't aliens flying those UFOs, they are ours.' And I will agree that definitely some are ours, but I'm absolutely convinced most of them are ET. Consider this one from summer of 1947. This very unusual case of an apparent UFO crash retrieval comes from MUFON Western Regional Director Paul Cerny, a well-respected researcher. This case took place on a farm outside of Salinas on a summer morning in 1947, July or August, really close to the same time as Roswell. The main witness today is a successful businessman. He was 19 years old at the time of this encounter. He and his fellow workers were cutting hay when the ranch foreman told them that a strange object had come down in a nearby cabbage field, and it was still there. So curious, the witness and his co-worker went to go see this object, and sure enough, it was still in the field. Keeping their distance from it, they cautiously approached and began to walk around it. They could see that this object was a large metallic disc, 9 feet in diameter, 4 feet high, made of a dull gray metal. There were small rectangular portholes around the rim of the craft. Otherwise, there were no markings, no evidence of any damage, nor was there any visible means of propulsion. So his curiosity growing, the witness finally mustered up the courage to run forward and quickly kick it with his foot. There was no reaction other than a hollow metallic clang, and around that time the U.S. Air Force arrived on the scene in a truck with a long flatbed attached and a contingent of officers. And as researcher Paul Cerny writes, they instructed the 2 men to, quote, get lost, and warned them not to breathe a word about what they had seen. Now, from a distance, the witness and his companions observed the military group proceed to struggle this metallic disc onto the truck bed, cover it up with a tarp, secure it, and drive off. And that was the last they saw or heard of it. They did inquire of the foreman later, and they learned that the ranch owners had informed the military authorities of the object's presence. On March 11, 1950, there was a little mini wave over Salinas. It started around 8 p.m. when more than 20 residents of Salinas called the local police department to report an unidentified flying object over the city. Others called the local newspaper. The first to call the police was a lady by the name of Constance Ragwinden. She was driving her car with her 2 children and her mother when she saw what she first thought was a shooting star. She immediately changed her mind, however, when the object, quote, swooped down right over her automobile. As she says, "I got scared and stopped the car. It looked like 2 dinner plates put together. It came down to about 2,000 feet, and as it came close, it gave off a strong bluish-white light that hurt our eyes, like a welder's torch. It made a series of looping motions, swoops down. It seemed to be right overhead. There was no noise. Then it disappeared over the mountains." So yeah, she said that this object performed loops over her vehicle, then sped off to the south at very high speed. And as she says, "I'm still scared. It was a weird experience. I was frightened. I hope I never see anything like that again." Now the next call to the police came only 5 minutes later. It was from Hiram S. Don, the owner of a Chinese market, who said that he saw it when he left the store to take some groceries to his car. He said it was bright, shaped like an egg, and moving so fast that it had a trail behind it. It was real close to the ground, he said. A third witness said it looked like a shooting star, but, quote, not quite the same. These reports reached astronomer Olin J. Egan at the nearby Lick Observatory, and he speculated that the object may have been a meteor, apparently unaware of or ignoring the details of the first-hand witnesses, which absolutely contradict this explanation. This could not have been a meteor. And in fact, in support of the above case is another one which occurred 2 days later on March 13, 1950, when Mr. Potter, the head engineer of a factory in Salinas, and 4 of his co-workers were on the loading dock busy at work when a shiny potato-shaped object appeared overhead. It looked to Mr. Potter like it was just pulling out of a dive when he first noticed it. It darted off real quickly, but impressed him enough to call the local sheriff. The sheriff called the Civil Aviation Authority, who said that they knew of no aircraft in the vicinity. Mr. Potter was interviewed by reporters, and he said that his coworkers ridiculed him mercilessly, but he refused to back down, saying he saw something, but stopped short of saying it was a genuine flying saucer. It was just 2 years later, December 12, 1952, a cold morning just before noon, when a work crew at the Spreckles Sugar Plant noticed a glowing object moving overhead. Among the witnesses was Virgil Wallace, who said that it had the appearance and size of, quote, an automobile headlight. Turned out that other people in town saw it too, and said that it passed over Salinas towards the south and was observed hovering for about 7 minutes over Mount Toro. As they watched, a military aircraft, apparently from Fort Ord, was seen approaching the craft, which scared it off. There was apparently no follow-up investigation, but decades later this sighting continued to cause interest. There's almost no information about this next case, which occurred on April 6, 1967, which is unfortunate because it sounds like a good one. It was about 8:45 p.m. when a couple in Salinas said that they saw a red disc with windows flying at low altitude over the city. That's all the information I could find. But here is another case which involves humanoids. This occurred in March 1972, and it comes from New Fork. As the witness says, "My sighting took place in the early 70s in Salinas. I think I was about 15 or so. It was late, and I didn't feel like going to bed, so I decided to do some stargazing. I grabbed a soda and tossed a folding chaise lounge chair up onto the garage roof to lay back on, and after being up there for a short time, I noticed movement in the eastern sky. It was not a moving point of light that I saw, but rather an area of stars being blocked out by a huge object moving slowly across the night sky. At first I thought it was a blimp, but quickly dismissed this when I realized that it was much too large. The best way to describe this object is to say that it looked much like a naval battleship turned upside down, only a little more rounded at the ends. It displayed no lights of its own, but I was able to observe the underside as it had become dimly lit by the city lights. The thing that was really weird about this craft was the fact that it moved in total silence. At one point, it was no more than 500 feet, almost directly above me. I heard nothing from it. The object continued moving slowly in a westerly direction towards the ocean and disappeared from sight. I'm 42 years old, married 18 years, and the father of 6. Up until now, the only people I've told of this were my parents, my wife and kids, and my best friend. Now, I'm not saying that I've ever been abducted, but when I think back, there were some pretty weird things that happened to me during my childhood. I can remember being scared in the middle of the night and getting out of bed. I remember looking down the darkened hallway and seeing a small figure backlit at the end of the hall. I remember the figure appeared startled. I didn't recall anything after that and dismissed it as a dream. Another time, I woke up in the middle of the night to see a small hooded figure kneeling by my bed. When I moved, the figure stood up, was wearing a long hooded robe, much like what a monk would wear. In the darkness, I could not see a face. That really freaked me out. I snatched the covers up over my head, and the next morning I asked my parents if either of them had checked on me during the night. They said they had not. My mom said that maybe it was an angel, so that's what I told myself to keep sane as I grew up. The last thing I'd like to mention about my childhood is a small metallic object I noticed under the skin of my outer thigh. I say it was metallic as it was just under the skin to the point where I could tell it was a gray metal color. I don't remember how it got there. I remember telling my friends that it was there from getting shot with a pellet gun and that the pellet was still there, although in fact I was never shot. The small thing is gone now and there is no scar. A rare case of a possible UFO crash landing occurred on February 27, 1968 in Salinas. It was 7:10 p.m. as air traffic controllers Richard Lockwood and his partner Bev Taylor were at the Salinas Airport Tower. Suddenly Bev called out, "What the hell is that?" And as Richard says, "I jumped out of the chair and it was this sounds dumb, it was a big green ball." It appeared to Richard that this object was about 3 miles away, just 200 feet above the ground, and it was crossing the runway at such high speed that it disappeared in about 3 seconds. Now, a plane was about to take off, so Richard asked the pilot to fly over the area where this object had gone, but the pilot didn't see anything. As it turns out, there were 3 people near Alisal High School, 1 mile north of the airport, around the same time, and they described what was apparently the same object. They said it had 4, quote, very, very large green lights surrounded by a solid mass of green. They said it appeared to crash land somewhere between the high school and the airport, though they heard nothing and saw no explosion. The police were informed, and Police Lieutenant Ray Jackson headed a 5-square-mile search of the area, checking with Geiger counters, infrared devices, and fire trucks with searchlights. Nothing was found. There was an interesting aftermath, though, when the nearby Fort Ord was contacted about the sighting, and they said that the objects were probably flares, and that they would agree to do a public display of flares to establish this theory. And in fact, Public Affairs Officer Don English told reporters, "It is a definite go. It will be done. It will depend somewhat on the weather, but it will be done." Needless to say, it was not done. Or if it was, there was zero publicity about it, which would have been the whole point. Meanwhile, sightings in Salinas continued, including one just a few months later. It was June 1978, and this one involves apparent missing time. As the witness says, I was only 7 years old when I had a strange experience. This is what I remember. I was playing Little League softball and a home run was hit. I jumped on my bike and rid into a wooded area where I saw the ball fly into. I got off my bike and went looking for the ball in the woods. After entering the woods, I remember a bright light shining through the trees and an awful smell like burnt rubber or sulfur. After that, I remember I was laying on the ground looking at the sky with my hands across my chest and the softball in my hands. I don't remember finding the softball, so I don't have any idea how I ended up with it. I guess I passed out from the smell, and then someone or something put the ball in my hands. So that's all the information in that case. It's certainly interesting because there was another sighting around that time. This one occurred on June 11, 1978, and it's an impressive multiple sighting by 5 young boys, including Don Ogawa, Bill Backus, Tim Price, Randy Moger, and Brian Klassmeyer. They were all between the ages of 10 and 14. It was around 1:20 p.m., and the boys were in the Pine Canyon area when Bill Backus was the first to point out a weird, shiny, bright white object in the sky. As Don Ogawa later told reporters, "We thought it was a jet at first. There was no smoke, no sound. It looked like a big wedge." So this object was flying a straight level course, but then it disappeared behind a hill. It reappeared and then darted straight up. This is what really impressed the witnesses. As Don says, it was, quote, really hauling. So seeing all of this, all of the boys were convinced that this was a genuine UFO. Here's another case, still in June of 1978. 2 or 3 weeks later, June 30th. This is a rare case of a UFO landing with actual landing traces. As the witness says, "I was outside playing with my dog, and it flew over my street, Toro Boulevard, towards the school down the road. I ran in, told my mom, and we walked together down to the school. The whole time my dog was going nuts. I remember I could barely hold him. When we got there, it was gone. But it left a burnt smell, and apparently where it landed, it left a ring around the school field where it landed. I remember it clearly. The ring was incredibly big, meaning the craft was big. Guessing the size, now 40 years later, I'd say it was 100 feet in diameter. It was a perfect circle, and it was still warm to the touch. When it flew over, it had blue to greenish lights underneath it, and thinking about it now, because I was young, it could have been its propulsion emitting the colors. It was only above the roofs of the houses by about 20 feet, if that. It was close enough you could hear it. For lack of a better word, it sounded like a metallic whistle. Hard to explain. And more people than me had seen it that day. I remember people standing in the street looking at the direction of the school, and there was actually a Salinas newspaper clipping that my mom saved for years talking about this UFO sighting. Many people had seen it that day, but I don't see any mention of it anywhere now. It must have been real, otherwise we would see media on the sighting. It can be hidden from the people, but I know what I saw, and I will never forget it. I could not find this newspaper clipping, but certainly an interesting report, and one of many. Get this one. This is so interesting. This occurred on August 10, 1981. It's a very bizarre case involving 3 witnesses. It was approaching evening that night, and they decided to get some parts at the local auto shop store in Salinas. And as the witness says, "As we approached the turn to the intersection, we saw some strange lights that were going through some mid-sized camphor trees. We thought it was some carnival at the school. As soon as we made the turn on the intersection, my son's eyes were as big as large olives, and he said, 'Dad, we have finally seen one.' I knew what he meant. I decided to park right below it, and we could see it. It was aluminum-like, and it had a row of windows on the bottom half, and a complete circle of windows on top, with a blue light always rotating. I told my son to check the bottom, and I would check the top. The bottom windows were like frosted, and we couldn't see anything inside. It was there hovering, about 10 to 15 degrees front down. It was just as clear as observing a plane at the airport. Now, when all of this happened, the object changed to a rotating platform with rotating yellow letter signs about 7 feet long. It was garbled at first, but it started going around with English letters, telling us to tell the world. We decided not to tell anyone, as we might look and sound like fools. My son, my wife, my 2 girls, and I talked about it for years. And the lights were coherent lighting of different colors, not just any lights. The bottom was covered with antenna-like sticks, and also a lot of lights. Now, the final strange thing is that it took them about 20 minutes to get back from the store, but this store is only 1 mile away, so there's a possibility there was missing time. Here's another very interesting case from Salinas, August 25, 2002. This sounds like a sighting, but apparently there are deeper levels of contact. The witness is anonymous. He reported his sighting to New Fork. As he says, I was driving home from Salinas Valley to Chualar when I saw an egg-shaped object that glowed baby blue in the dark open sky. I was in the back roads. The object didn't look that high from the sky, maybe a quarter-mile high when I first saw the object. Somehow I was so into the beautiful light that I don't even remember how I stopped in the side of the road with my car turned off. I got really scared because I didn't know what had happened. Some way or somehow, while I was looking at the object, I received some type of input that I would rather talk about in person. But I swear to God that I am not joking around. I now know the truth, and I know it's time to let everybody know why we are here and how we got here. Certainly an intriguing report. Here's a very interesting case involving an apparent crop circle. This occurred on December 30, 2013, when 2 young men were driving outside of Salinas and saw weird green flashes of light in a field. They quickly pulled out their camera and captured some videotape of this. You can actually see the pictures here. They posted this on YouTube anonymously. They could not explain it, and it was quite brief, but boy were they shocked to find out the next day that a mysterious and large crop circle had appeared in apparently this exact location where they had seen the lights. And this crop circle attracted so much attention that the farmer who owned the property had to hire security guards to keep people out. Weirdly, this crop circle was plowed over shortly after it was discovered, but not before a photographer by the name of Julie Belanger flew over it in a helicopter and took several photos of it. You can see it here. It's beautiful, clearly meaningful, and in fact an expert in Braille, so that the center of the circle displays the number 192 repeated several times. What this means is hard to say. It does look like a computer chip. Several people noticed this, and it was shortly after this that the NVIDIA Corporation, who makes computer chips, said that they did it, and it was actually a publicity stunt. I don't know. I mean, I tend to believe this explanation, but there's still some questions about all this, because there's no word on how they made this crop circle, why nobody saw them making it, what those green lights were. Did the farmer allow it? Was he a part of it? And if it was a publicity stunt, why was it so quickly plowed over? So there are still lots of questions surrounding this, but it's certainly an interesting event that got a lot of publicity in Salinas at that time. Here's another case. February 2014. This comes from a young couple, a law student and a construction worker, and another couple, a mechanic and his retired wife. As the law student says, it was approximately 5 a.m. I noticed a very large, very bright light outside my window. I looked at it with my naked eye for about 10 minutes and observed that the light was staying in one place without moving. I went and got my boyfriend. He suggested that we get my binoculars and look at the light with them. What we saw was so clear through the binoculars that we both had to sit down for a minute out of pure shock. It was a saucer-shaped craft, more like an egg laying on its side. There were windows all across the center of the craft where the light was shining through. The light was super bright and white or yellowish in color. The craft appeared to be brown or grayish in color. We both took turns watching it for over 2 hours, during which time the sun came up over the horizon. and the craft did not move from the one spot except very slightly coming closer to us and then going back to its original position. I tried to film it on my cell phone, but my camera on my phone was not able to zoom in enough to get a clear image. We both watched the craft change shape before our eyes into some sort of leaf-like shape, and then ever so slowly it moved directly up into the sky until it was a small bright light too high up to identify anymore. But the most amazing part of this thing is that we have now seen it every morning for 7 days in a row. So they're very much convinced that this is not a planet or a star, because they watched the stars move past this craft while it remained stationary. They also saw several planes come within range of this craft, but fly right by it. And compared to the planes, this object was huge. They said about 50 times the size of this plane. And they did get 2 other witnesses. They brought over a really good camera, and they're trying to videotape it, and that's the last I could find on this case. One final case from Salinas occurred on April 5, 2019. A woman who lives high on a hilltop in Salinas, surrounded by 8 acres, said that she had a humanoid encounter. She said she woke up in her bedroom to see something highly unusual. And she says, "This orb of bright white light, it had eyes and a slit that represented a mouth. It was approximately 18 inches from my face. It illuminated my face as it seemed to assess me while I was trying to assess it. I remember thinking, did someone break into our house and is in the bedroom? The door was closed, and this orb did not have a body, nor did I see any hair. It appeared to have somewhat of a face. The eyes were staring through me, and it was not a friendly gaze. I remember being frightened. However, I could not break my gaze. Then it disappeared. Now, her husband was there. He never woke up. Her dogs were in the other room and did not react in any way." How amazing is that? I mean, Salinas has everything. UFO crash retrievals, landing cases, humanoids, a UFO basically putting out a sign for the witnesses. That case was really strange. Super interesting. It's amazing how many cases there are when you consider that most go unreported. Salinas is definitely, there must be something about that area that is attracting UFOs, because that's a lot of cases for a town of that size. Now let's move to the next location of Dubuque, Iowa. Gotta thank Coley Weber for suggesting this. Thank you, Coley. Really appreciate it. We've spoken several times. I hope you find this interesting, because some of the cases I found here, wow. I mean, there was one guy who had missing time, but some really, really interesting cases of all different types. As we'll see. Here we go, exploring Dubuque, Iowa. Dubuque definitely has some crazy UFO cases, such as this one, which occurred way back in 1880. I'm not sure that this is UFO related, but it is somewhat interesting because it involves strange humanoids. It's a wild case involving supernatural beings and was published in 1880 in the Cleveland, Ohio Plains Dealer newspaper, and it involves a young girl who went to, quote, live with the fairies. So this story comes from a Dubuque farmer by the name of Andy Crow, whose teenage daughter Kitty had become deathly ill. Doctors couldn't heal her, so he took her to Father Bernard of the New Melleray Monastery, who had a reputation for psychic healing. Now, after seeing the father, the daughter Kitty said he couldn't help her and that she was going to leave home for a year and go live with the fairies. Now, her father, Andy Crow, dismissed this as just a child's imagination and forgot about it until one morning a year later, he went to his daughter's room to wake her up and she was gone. Police were called, a search ensued, but no trace of her could be found. So suspicions began to fall on Andy Crow, her father, but 1 year later she returned. And she said that she had in fact been living with the fairies, riding in their invisible vehicles, living in style. Everyone rejoiced, a feast was held to celebrate her return. She shared her story with everyone. But going to visit her sister later, Mary Ann Hayes, she told her that the fairies had returned for her and that she would be leaving immediately. So her sister followed her upstairs and saw two strange-looking men dressed in weird, dark clothes. So Kitty Crow left with the two men. Alarmed, Miss Ann Hayes followed and watched them walk up the street a few blocks and just boom, disappeared into thin air. And Kitty Crow was never seen again. While this does sound like a wild story, apparently these people did exist. And author Chris Woodyard traced the story and confirmed that this family was a real family and that Kitty Crow allegedly did disappear. There was a monastery in the area. He confirmed a number of the facts of this story, so I don't know, it remains a mystery. It was on July 4, 1947 that Louis and Olga Korn of 879 Rush Street reported seeing UFOs. But it was Olga's sighting 2 weeks later on July 17 that made the local newspaper, because on that day she said that she saw 6 identical-looking objects hovering for about an hour over the Mississippi River. She said they appeared to be oval-shaped, 2 feet long, 1 foot wide, and as she says, quote, deeper than a saucer, more like a shallow cup with a broken handle. Strangest of all was that they appeared to be somewhat vaporous, kind of like a cloud, and floated gently through the air before finally disappearing. Of course, at that time, there was a huge super wave of sightings sweeping across the country, including the Kenneth Arnold sighting in Mount Rainier, and just days earlier, the Roswell UFO crash in New Mexico. The next sighting to get any attention comes from Morton P. Paradise, who had a very interesting encounter. He wrote it up for the local newspaper. As he says, on the night of December 22nd, this is 1952, Wednesday at approximately 7:30 p.m., I was traveling in an easterly direction on Route 151 between Cedar Rapids and Dubuque, Iowa. Suddenly to my left, but ahead of me, I spied a bright, luminous green light in the sky. My first impression was that there had been a collision of 2 airplanes in the sky. Then I noticed that the light didn't waver or move, and I discovered that it seemed to be hovering and pulsating, getting dimmer and brighter. It lost some of its brilliance and got brighter, so bright that I could scarcely keep my eyes on it. It had no definite shape, but seemed like its edges were ragged, and it was aslant. So you can see his drawing here, and as he says, by this time the hair on the back of my head was standing up. I swerved off of the road and brought my car to a complete stop and turned off my lights so that I could see better. I got out of my car. The light was still there, pulsating luminously. Within 3 to 5 seconds after I got out of my car, it seemed to rise straight up and disappear right in front of my eyes. That's all there is to the story. I was all alone on the highway at the time. When I got to the nearest phone, I called the local paper and asked if there was an Army Air Force base nearby. They said no. So I went to the office of the paper, the Dubuque Telegraph, and I gave my story to the night editor. His name is Mr. Fred Lawler. I'm 33 years old. I served 4 years in the Army, during which time I served part of the time with anti-aircraft forces. I taught airplane recognition for some time, and I will swear that what I saw was no airplane or airplane flare. I am not looking for publicity. I do not take the liberty of saying that I saw a flying saucer. I wouldn't know what to call this phenomenon. I only know that it was not natural, and I feel that you would like to know about it. Arguably, Dubuque's most famous UFO encounter comes from a pilot by the name of Charles R. Morris. He reported his sighting to Major Robert Friend of Project Blue Book at the Aerospace Technical Intelligence Center at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. This sighting occurred just before 6 p.m. on March 4, 1960, and as Charles Morris writes, my wife and I at our home were watching a T-6 aircraft performing at approximately 2,000 feet. This turned out to be a pupil of Morris's when, as Morris says, we saw 3 brightly colored solid objects in line appearing in the sky traveling north-northeast. We saw them for approximately 4 minutes, and as they disappeared, they seemed to be climbing very slightly. The objects did not give off smoke or any vapor trail, drop anything, change brightness, shape, or color, did not explode, speed up, or stand still at any time. The objects were sharply outlined. Though Charles added that these objects were in fact saucer-shaped, silver in color, and he guessed about 200 feet long and 60 feet wide. He estimated that they were at about 20,000 feet altitude, moving at around 200 miles per hour. And he did manage to capture them on 8mm color film, about 10 to 20 feet of film, which he sent to the Air Force. He said only a small portion of this film actually captured the objects, but the Air Force said they found nothing on the film and returned it back to him. They did do research. They found no evidence of any other aircraft in the area and ultimately called the sighting, quote, unidentified. And as it turns out, there were other witnesses. Another was H.V. Ludovici, his wife and son, who saw the objects. And Mr. Ludovici described them as, quote, 3 bright metallic objects, traveling very slowly, almost floating. They watched the objects for 10 minutes, at which point one seemed to flash at them and give off a puff of smoke. And in fact, more than 20 calls came into the local newspaper reporting these objects. So a lot of people were very much impressed by this. At least 2 of the witnesses, Ferdinand Nessler and Alan A. Jones, said that they used binoculars and believed the objects were airplanes. But further checks with the military and local airports showed no planes in the area. And Charles Morris, he's a trained pilot and a flight instructor, said he'd never seen anything like these objects in all of his years of flying. This very interesting and close-up sighting occurred around 6:30 p.m. on October 12, 1967, when 2 children at the home of Richard Lamour were in the outside yard at a picnic table when they said they saw a, quote, silver-colored egg-shaped object. They said it moved overhead at very low altitude. After speaking with the adults, they estimated that this object was an estimated 10 feet long, 5 feet across, and 50 feet high. And in fact, it appeared to be coming in for a landing. That's how low it was. And the children could see what looked like landing gear hanging down beneath it. When the children jumped up to watch it, this object immediately moved upwards and moved to the north. They tried to chase it, but were unable to keep up with it. And unknown to these witnesses, it turns out their neighbors, the John R. Wallachi family, also observed this object. Miss Wallachi was watching her 5 children, aged 2 through 10, through the window in the yard when suddenly she saw, quote, the children's eyes get as big as $50. She ran outside to see what they were looking at, but this object had gone, and the children described an object that, quote, had a small dome on the top and a thing coming out the back. Pretty amazing sighting. Case after case in Dubuque. Here's another one, August 22nd through 23rd, 1972. This comes from the Dubuque Telegraph-Herald reporter John McCormick. He writes that Brian Downey, age 19, and his girlfriend, soon-to-be wife Kathy Atkins, age 18, you can see them here, were heading home from a date in the early morning hours of August 22nd, 1972. They had just crested a hill near Flora Park when they noticed a bright orange object in the western sky. Brian said it was flat on the bottom with a dome on top. They watched it for about 10 seconds when it passed out of view. Kathy, who was driving, quickly backed up the car at the top of the hill to get a second look, but the object was gone. And they said they would not have reported it to the newspaper had they not seen another story in the paper about someone else who described seeing a similar orange UFO at 2:30 a.m. the same morning that they saw the object. And the UFO was back the next night. This time it was 8:30 p.m., August 23rd. Miss Leslie Avery, her brother Clarence Wernemont, Lester Ball, and his wife Lucille were at their home on 6351 Asbury Road in Asbury. This is pretty much a part of Dubuque, immediately to the west, and they saw something in the sky they could not explain. It was Lucille who saw it first, and she shouted out, "Oh my God, what's that?" They all looked up in astonishment, and Miss Avery says that this object was, quote, bright, with red, blue, and green lights. They could hear it making a humming noise. It hovered for several minutes, pulsated its lights, then moved slowly north in a circle before moving off to the south. All the witnesses were convinced it was a UFO. And as Miss Avery says, "I can't believe it. From now on, I'm going to watch the sky out there." This sighting got a lot of publicity. April 12, 1977, about 10 p.m., 7 teenagers in 2 separate groups, they were aged 14 to 17, all saw something they couldn't explain. The first group of 4 was walking down Ann Street. You can see it here. The second group of 3 was just off the street, hunting night crawlers. And suddenly both groups simultaneously noticed something odd traveling southwest over the Mississippi River, near U.S. Highway 20. Both groups ran to the end of Ann Street to get a better view. None could see the object itself, just a cluster of lights. Jerry Lanzer and Kenny Birch described seeing 3 white lights with 1 red light, which blinked in and out. Jeff Ertel said the same thing, except he said that there were 2 red lights. Jim Schumacher said that he saw 2 white lights and a bunch of little red lights in the middle like a circle. And his brother, Greg, said that he saw 3 lights, red, white, and green. Jeff Pitts remembered only 1 white light, so none of the witnesses could quite agree on what they saw. They did not think it was a plane. The position of the lights was all wrong. The object was totally silent. It was moving strangely. Jerry Lancer said it was going no faster than 25 miles per hour when he saw it. But Jeff Ertel said it was going fast, like a blur. Then it stopped. Then it went down in steps or a slope, real gentle-like. Kenny Birch also remembers it stopping completely in midair. So some slightly contradicting testimony, but definitely all the boys are in agreement that what they saw was very unusual. Now, Venus has often been blamed for being a UFO, and certainly in some cases this is true, but I'm not so sure that that's the cause of this sighting on February 22nd, 1982, when a bunch of calls began pouring into the Dubuque police station, radio station, and newspapers reporting a, quote, large, round, bright object reportedly about 1,000 feet above the ground in the eastern sky. The calls began around 4 a.m., and most people insisted upon anonymity, not all. Nancy Tapin of Terrace Heights Mobile Home Park, you can see it here, said that her 4-year-old son was woken up by the light and became terrified because this light was streaming in through his window. Other callers said that this object actually moved and changed in brightness, and calls were coming not only from Dubuque, but from the surrounding areas. So a lot of people thought this was very unusual. Frank Miller, the director of the Heitkamp Planetarium at Loras College nearby, said that what people saw was probably Venus. And as he says, "I don't know for sure that these people saw Venus, but that's the first thing that comes to mind." I don't know. It's pretty unusual that that many people will start calling the newspapers, the sheriff's office, radio stations to report an object in the sky that's quite low, unless, this is truly something unusual. Another very interesting case, apparently a missing time abduction, occurred on October 12, 1996. It was 10:30 a.m. as 8 young teenagers were walking through a Dubuque cemetery, likely Linwood, and as the main witness says, there was this eerie feeling I had like someone or something was watching us. My buddy was right next to me, and I turned around and stopped looking at the horizon, and there was this very bright light moving very fast horizontally. And I said to my buddy, "Hey, look, it's a UFO." He started laughing and said it was just a plane or a helicopter, and I said no. The light was solid and had no conventional running lights, and the next thing they knew, this light was right over their heads. The witness's friend grabbed him by the shoulders and yelled that they had to get out of there. Turned out the others had already run away. And as the witness says, "I looked up, and the light suddenly became very warm, welcoming almost, like you were being wrapped up in a warm blanket. That's when everything went silent, and I couldn't move. That was the last I remember of being in that spot." Fast forward 2.5 hours later, I remember hearing my name being yelled by 7 people from afar. I opened my eyes, my head was down, so I was looking at the ground, and my hands were in my pockets. I was smiling and laughing as these guys came charging towards me. when they found me in the junior high school football field 200 yards away on the 50-yard line. My cousin was the first one to grab me by my shoulders, and he shook me, asking me where I'd been for the last 2.5 hours. We were way past curfew. It was 12:30 a.m. I said I was right here the whole time. So later, at home, he did find a strange mark on his pelvis. He realized he had missing time. He now knows what that means and is considering hypnosis. Here's another Dubuque sighting, a very close-up sighting of a solid disc-shaped craft, which occurred on January 3rd, 2002. As the witness says, the UFO had light blue flashing lights. It was saucer-shaped and had a dome-like top on it, and it acted like it wanted us to stop. What we saw was clearly a UFO. It had flashing lights that were very bright. The lights would flash on for a second and go off for about 1.5 to 2 seconds, and then back on again. It had windows, 4 or 5 on the side that we could see. The lights seemed to be coming out of the windows. It came towards us on Highway 61 last Thursday night. Then it seemed to change directions and go the way we were going for a few seconds. It was about 50 feet above us. Finally, it started flying away from us until it disappeared. So we thought. Then I saw the light blue lights again in my rear view mirror, which lasted for about 6 miles. The lights weren't getting further away from us as we drove on, and by the time we got into the city, it was gone. I used to think people that believed in aliens and UFOs were insane. Now people think I'm insane when they hear my story, and I had 4 other people with me too. Oh well, we know what we saw, and no one's going to tell us any different. A final sighting in Dubuque took place on August 18, 2002. This is an interesting one because it involves a UFO that apparently tracked a plane flying just south of Dubuque. A husband and wife were both pilots. One of them is named Marlene, and they were descending from 12,000 to 5,000 feet when at about 9,000 feet of altitude this UFO appeared. As the wife Marlene says, during the descent at 500 feet per minute at around 140 knots, I looked back behind the right wing and saw a white light between the cloud banks and far in the distance. It appeared to me as a landing light on a plane. It was 5 or more miles away and almost parallel to us. Within a few seconds, it flew closer at a great rate of speed. As it was the closest to us, at 1,500 to 2,000 feet, I could see the bright white light was all it was. There was no wingtip or tail lights. There was no wings or body. As the light descended rapidly next to us, it was still a white light from the back. This all happened in a matter of 5 to 6 seconds. I felt it was on a collision course with us as we were descending into the same cloud it had disappeared into. So the couple was not informed of any other planes in the area, which they would have been if there had been a plane there. And it couldn't have been a landing light. As the witness says, no planes turned their landing lights on at 9,000 feet. So Marlene and her husband are convinced it was not a meteor, not any conventional craft, but instead a genuine UFO. As Marlene says, the speed and the path of its descent is not possible by any aircraft I am aware of. It had to travel 5 or 6 miles in a matter of 6 seconds. That's 1 mile a second. I do not think that this was another plane. There you go, Coley. I told you I was sure that I could find cases in Dubuque, and of course I did. Did not expect to find that case involving, a ferry kidnapping? I don't know how else to put that. I wonder about that one. I mean, that is a very old case, very hard to research or confirm. So, I don't know. Not sure what to think of it. Is it a story? Is it true events? Hard to say for sure, but certainly interesting, and makes me wonder if it's related to, UFO experiences in terms of people going on board. It's a very odd case, but as we see, all types of cases are represented in most of these locations. And let's move to another one. Daytona Beach, Florida. I expected to find more cases than I did. Still, I found quite a few, some really good cases as well. Some well-documented cases, multiple witness couple of really odd ones as well. Gotta thank you, Og Peekall, for suggesting this. I always learn something. It's like not only a geography lesson, but I learned stuff about each of these locations, their history. I like to dig deep and see what I can figure out as to why these certain locations are attracting UFO activity. But like I said, UFOs are being seen everywhere. They are ubiquitous. I doubt that there's any location on this planet that doesn't have a history of UFO encounters. And that's exactly what I'm finding. So yeah, Daytona Beach, Florida. Here we go. I found 7 encounters in Daytona Beach, and some really interesting ones, including humanoids. The first occurred on August 29, 1950. This comes from J. E. Salter, Jr. of Power Street, and he told the Daytona Beach News that at 5:30 p.m. on August 29, 1950, he and his brother-in-law Ben Bernard observed a disk about the size of a dishpan spinning under a low-hanging cloud. They watched it move into a dark cloud in the western sky, and then come out of the cloud and move to the south. They said it was a very low altitude, and it appeared to be throwing off a phosphorus-type glow. 2 years later, another impressive case. The witness in this case is Post Office Clerk J.B. Gormley, who says that around 10 p.m. on January 3, 1952, he saw an object that was half moon-shaped, moving towards the southeast much faster than a jet plane, and yet making no noise. He said it looked to be metallic, maybe about 30 feet across, and quite low, 400 to 500 feet high. He reported it to the Daytona Beach Morning Journal, who did check with the Civil Aviation Authority, who told them that they have no information about this object. So it appears to be unidentified. And there are more. Check out this one. This is really unusual. This one comes from the Florida UFO Study Group. The witness is Kathleen Rand, and one day in the spring of 1957, she had just left the Halifax Hospital in Daytona Beach and was driving along the highway to DeLand when she noticed something, quote, fuzzy, and it was pacing her car. She described this as a thing, a round cloud. She said it had a dark center and was moving at an estimated 1,000 feet of altitude, and it was following her car. In fact, she says it followed her car for a full 20 minutes before suddenly making a right turn and moving rapidly away. So clearly not a cloud. This next case got a lot of attention and was investigated by NICAP, the National Investigative Committee on Aerial Phenomena, and it comes from a good witness, a pilot and a photographer by the name of Clarence Brown. He was 27 years old at the time of this sighting. It was the evening of November 11, 1959. He and his friend Doyle Hewitt were in a 170 Cessna flying at 2,000 feet near Daytona Beach when a UFO showed up on an apparent collision course. And as Clarence says, I looked out towards the ocean, and all at once I saw this light coming. At first I thought it was a jet. It was flying as fast as a jet, but when it turned, it didn't make any noise, and if it had been a jet or another kind of airplane, I would have heard it. It turned about 4,000 feet from me. If it had been an airplane, I would have seen the silhouette in the moonlight. It was as bright when it turned as it came head-on. It was a white light. Not a bright light, not a dim light, just a bright blur. I saw it turn past me, and as it continued south, it disappeared. It was just bright blue, and it didn't act like it was throwing a beam or anything like that. Now his friend Doyle Hewitt saw it too and turned to Clarence and said, "What was that?" Clarence said, "It must have been an airplane." But now he doesn't think so. As he says, "I thought it was an airplane at first, with nothing but its landing lights on. But if it had been a plane, I would have heard it, or seen its silhouette in the sky. I believe there is a logical explanation for it, but I don't know what it is. I've never seen anything like this before. I used to think anybody who saw unidentified flying objects were crazy." Unfortunately, there's very little information about this incredible humanoid case, which was witnessed by a Clyde W. Hicks on September 7, 1964. He wrote about his experience in a letter to NICAP. He said it was a foggy night. He he was driving towards Daytona Beach when he saw a, quote, spaceship. He said it came drifting out of a fog bank. He said it was egg-shaped and more than 200 feet long. It had 2 rows of windows, and through the windows he could see at least a dozen, quote, large people moving about. When he first saw the object, it was very bright, or as he says, it looked to be ablaze all over. But when the luminosity went out, he saw that the object appeared to be silvery in the moonlight. He said that he does have a background in aviation, and he is convinced that this object was not a plane or a blimp. This next case comes from UFO researcher Christopher Montgomery of the UFO group UFORC, or the UFO Resource Center. He's also the author of the book UFOs, A Scientific Inquiry. It was around 8:30 p.m. on February 20, 2008. It was a calm night, and a father and son were at Daytona Beach when they noticed strange lights performing unusual maneuvers over the ocean. They were glowing green objects, they said, and per the witnesses, the objects were, quote, moving up and down and back and forth. They heard no sound coming from the objects, which they estimated were quite low in the sky, about 200 feet. They watched them for about 20 minutes, but were not able to identify them. The most recent case I could find occurred on April 3, 2023, and it was investigated by Rusty Hester. You can see her here. She's a MUFON field investigator and assistant state director for MUFON Florida and a member of the MUFON Experiencer Resource Team. This case involves 3 witnesses whose house is about a 5-minute drive to the beach. They were outside their house at 8:37 p.m., April 3, 2023, when they saw 2 unusual objects flying silently through the sky just off the coast. Quickly grabbed his camera and was able to take some pictures. As the witness says, the objects were glowing orange, shaped like a boomerang, going very fast from south to north off the coast of Daytona Beach. The witnesses said the objects flew very close to each other, and they were so disturbed by the sighting that they canceled their plans that night to go fishing in this area. But you can see the pictures here. It's interesting because this is actually a video. This is a still of the video. The video showed that these objects were actually flashing lights, which was something they did not notice while viewing them. Rusty Hester, the investigator, did check the flight paths in the area and couldn't find any aircraft in that area, certainly none that matched what the witnesses saw, and she closed this case as unknown. How interesting is that? I hope you found it interesting. Occupants, Daytona Beach has definitely delivered. That last case was pretty impressive with the photographs of these V-shaped objects. I always love it when people are able to capture photographs of what they've seen, because it's often been said that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, when it comes to UFOs, it's worth far more than that. Not only provides confirmation of what a person has seen, but also it's almost impossible to describe in words some of these sightings that people are having. And a picture just makes it so much easier to see what other people are seeing. So yeah, another location on this planet that has had encounters. Now let's move to another location, Statesville, North Carolina. This is a fairly large city, mid-size I would say, 30,000 or so people. Expected to find a lot more than I did, but I found some really good ones. This one was suggested by Old Marine Mountain and Metals, so thank you very much for the suggestion of this location. North Carolina has got a lot of activity, and Statesville apparently is no exception. With a population of 30,000 in Statesville, North Carolina, I expected to find more cases than I did, but I found 2 good ones. Here's one which occurred on September of 1955, and this comes from APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. The witness is Budita L. Mitchell. She's a trained observer from the Ground Observer Corps Station on the outskirts of Statesville, North Carolina. And in fact, she had spent the morning there, then came to her home at 709 Colleton Road. This is in Raleigh, some distance to the east, but still quite close to Statesville. And as Budita says, I was in the yard with my binoculars facing southwest. A glint of something shiny caught my eye, and I focused the binoculars on 3 white or silver craft flying in V formation. But they were not planes. They were circular in shape. When I first saw them, their size, to the naked eye, was about that of the top of a pencil eraser held at arm's length. I estimated that they were flying at a fairly low rate of speed, at an altitude of about 15,000 feet, moving east to west. I watched fascinated for a minute or two, and suddenly one craft darted ahead of the others in a tremendous burst of speed, then slowed down and waited for the others to catch up. This started a sort of game, evidently, and for another 2 or 3 minutes, until they were out of sight, I watched them playing around, almost like lambs or puppies, in the sky. I reported this to my superior in the Ground Observer Corps and told some other members about the sighting, but evidently only my friends believed me. So this was in the direction of Statesville and could very likely have been seen from there. But here's another really dramatic case involving a UFO landing and humanoids in Statesville. This occurred on June 29, 1986, around dusk. The witnesses are a father and son, and they lived on 100 acres of land on a dead-end street, a pretty rural part of Statesville. The son was 12 years old, and they went outside and saw this gigantic craft sitting in their cornfield. And as the witness says, "I have thought of this event my whole life. My father and I were standing at the edge of our yard when my dad said, 'What the hell is that?' I looked and saw what was about as tall as a 30-story building, just sitting 100 yards from us in a cut cornfield. It was about as wide as a football field or so. It had windows running all down the left side like a tall building. I could also see coming out the right side of a cone, shaped like a metallic booster-looking object, like on our space shuttles. It had a little bit of steam coming out of it like it was a vent. I could also see at the top what I swear looked like a head with bull's horns or something, an emblem of some kind. It scared my dad so bad that when I ran towards it to get closer for a better look, he screamed at me to stop and wait for him to go first and see what the hell had landed in our field. He finally caught me and led the way when all of a sudden it vanished and was gone. We walked back then, but to this day I wish I had gone on out there, because I think still to this day it was still there and just cloaked itself. I swear on my life, and my father would too, that this happened one late evening in the late 1980s, and I have never forgotten it or been able to explain it. But I feel now for sure, after reading about people reporting the same UFO in detail, mine was not just lit up. I could see people in the windows." There you go, old mountain marine and metals. Told you I could find something in Statesville, and I did. How about that last case? I can only imagine what it must be like to see a massive UFO sitting in your yard or your farm field, and not only seeing this gigantic craft, but looking through the portholes and seeing humanoid forms. Wow. Amazing. These are events that stick with people for the rest of their lives. And you can certainly see why. All right, now we move to our last location in this collection. Thank you for sticking around. Now we explore Annadale, New York. This one was suggested by Becca. This is a quite small neighborhood on Staten Island, covering about 200 plus acres, so I didn't find a lot. But I found at least 2 really interesting cases, one involving landing traces. So I think you'll find it interesting, Becca. Certainly hope so. Let's go. Annadale is the last location I am exploring in this little episode here. I found just a few cases, 2 actually. This is a very small neighborhood, 222 acres. And one case I found is quite interesting. This occurred on February 10, 1975. This case comes from NICAP researcher Dennis Anderson and was also presented in Ted Phillips' book about UFO landing trace cases. It was around 7 p.m., again February 10, 1975, when 2 boys, age 15, were in the forests of Annadale and had just entered a clearing where there was a frozen pond. They were checking the thickness of the ice in hopes of skating on this pond, when suddenly they saw a huge orange glowing ball about 20 feet in diameter, hovering about 400 feet away, just above some trees near the frozen pond. And as they watched over the next 10 minutes, this glowing sphere compressed into more of a football shape, shrunk down then to the size of a basketball, and suddenly disappeared. They heard no noise, nor did they feel any heat. Frightened, they fled the area, but it turns out there was, in a way, another witness. Another person was in the area. He didn't see the object, but says that his German Shepherd dog reacted very nervously, whining and whimpering at something in the woods in this exact area. And this was a trained attack dog, so this behavior was very unusual. And in fact, the dog not only whined and whimpered, it ran back home in fear. So the boys left the area but returned the next morning to explore it and found that the trees where this object had hovered, ranging in height from 4 to 5 feet, one report says 20 feet, had been sheared off and were coated with what appeared to be a carbon-like substance. Researcher Dennis Anderson went to the scene with a reporter a few days later and confirmed the presence of the broken and burned trees. As he says, "What I found was that the trees in the area were knocked down in kind of a radial pattern, and that the earth was charred. So samples were taken and analyzed, and they confirmed that the wood of the trees was in fact burned and the residue was carbon. Weirdly, the analysis showed that the fire appeared to be oil-based. This was odd considering the eyewitnesses' testimony of seeing this object, and Dennis Anderson, who interviewed the witnesses, says that there definitely was not a hoax, and that their witnesses, quote, their honesty and credibility are excellent. As he says, I would say this is our best local UFO sighting." One final case, July 17, 2004. I'll just quote the witness directly. As he says, "What I saw was a sphere-shaped craft hovering over my house at nearly 2,500 feet. It did not move at all, and there were 2 times when it was not visible, then reappeared in the same original location. Although it was a nice day out, the craft appeared to be equipped with luminous white light. This light looked somewhat like neon white or a fluorescent white. My sister was outside with me, and I was pointing over the house, but she was not able to see it because she was seated under the umbrella for shade from the sun. I said, 'Look at that in the sky. If you see what I'm looking at, you will believe in UFOs.' But she did not bother to get up. He did try to record it with his camcorder, but by the time he got it working, this object had moved off." Well, Becca, that's all I could find in Annadale specifically. Quite a few locations in the surrounding areas, but I didn't cover those. And again, I'm sure there are more there. I'm going to be generous and say that 1 in 20 people report their encounters to, say, the police, the Air Force, or a UFO reporting center, but most don't. I've interviewed so many people, and the vast majority said that they've never talked to the police or MUFON or anything like this. So again, most of these cases are going undocumented, and finding this many in all these locations just goes to show you how common UFO encounters are. And you can see the entire range of cases: sightings, landings, face-to-face encounters with humanoids, on-board experiences, a couple of crash retrievals in this episode. How interesting is that? Certainly it indicates that our government knows far, far more than they're publicly saying. So yeah, that's it for today. 9 locations. If you want to provide a location for me to look up, please feel free to do so. But I would caution you that you'll have to be patient, because I've still got hundreds of people in line waiting for me to explore the location that they provided. I'm working my way down the list. Some of these are quite large locations, which honestly will take me a week just to go through all the documentation. So this is a very difficult research project, but can't say that it's work because I'm having fun doing it. And this series shows once again that UFOs are not only seen everywhere, but that I think ETs are doing a vigorous publicity campaign, sort of grassroots movement to announce their presence, likely because our own governments are covering this subject up and don't want people to know the truth. And ETs are not having it. They're doing all they can to disclose. And in fact, I think the ETs have done their part to disclose. We now have enough cases to say for sure that this is a real thing. And I think anyone who does objective, unbiased research can only come to the conclusion that UFOs are real. My point is the ETs have done their part. The rest is up to us. So that's it. Thank you very much for watching. I truly appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed this episode, maybe learned a little bit. And until next time, keep asking those hard questions, keep searching for the truth. Most important of all, keep having fun, and I will see you next Friday. Bye for now.